Say it is one of the earliest catechetical instruction manuals that goes back probably to the first century itself. And this is not a book of the Bible. But what it does represent clearly to us is the understanding of the early Christian church on issues of this type, because there is no ambiguity in the Didache. The Didache sets forth as a clear, emphatic prohibition, thou shalt not commit murder by abortion. I mean, clearly in the Didache, abortion is considered murder, which indicates that at least the early church believed that abortion was murder. That was true as the church progressed through the ages. It was the view of Augustine. It was the view of Aquinas. It was the view of Calvin. It was the view of Luther. It was the view of Edwards. And even into the 20th century, where we've moved into a time in theology where less authority was accorded to Scripture than, say, would have been given by Augustine and Aquinas and those people, by people and professors like Karl Barth, Emil Brunner, and the German ethicist Helmut Thielicke, all have taken very strong stands on this question, saying in their judgment, there's no question that abortion is a form of murder. And that gets my attention, that we see such a consensus in the history of Christianity. But now I want to take some time to look at natural law. Is there something that we can discover from natural law that we don't discern in the writings of the text of Scripture? First of all, when we look at nature, and we're trying to make a scientific designation as when a person is a person, we are trying to discover discernible, clear lines of demarcation. One of the most obvious, simple, and easy lines of demarcation that we can ever find is birth. And many people say, there's no question about that. Once the umbilical cord is cut, and that infant now is breathing on his own, is no longer dependent upon the nourishment system of his mother, and is an individuated human being, then they are clearly alive. Now, there are, again, as I say, some who will not grant that even then the person is human. It takes a while beyond it, but the overwhelming majority of people and scientists would agree that after birth, at least, a person is human. But now the question is there another point before birth? And that's what the question is in the abortion issue. This is not an issue of infanticide. It is an issue of whether or not it is appropriate to kill unborn fetuses. Now, if we're going to look for significant points of departure between birth and however far you want to go back in history of the development of this potential human being, the next clearest line of demarcation is conception. There are other points along the way: implantation, what some call quickening, or when the heart starts beating, or when brain waves are discernible, and so on. But as I say, the most obvious point of demarcation, where the process of the production of a child begins, is at conception. What has been important to the medical decision on this is a relatively recent discovery. By recent, I don't mean last week, but I mean 20th century. And that is that we understand in modern science that the entire genetic code that generates the individual particular characteristics, size, shape, and development, all of that, of a personal human being, that entire genetic code is established at conception. Not 6 weeks after, or 12 weeks after, or 3 months, or 6 months, but at the point of conception, the entire genetic code is there. Within 18 to 25 days after conception, there is a discernible heartbeat. And the beating of the heart Though the cessation of the beating of the heart doesn't immediately constitute the cessation of life in the judgment of the medical community, the beating of the heart is a very significant consideration when we're talking about human life. I think we all understand that, particularly if our heart should stop this night. Within 8 weeks, which is still very early in the first trimester, brain waves and fingerprints are present in this fetus. Between 12 and 13 weeks, this fetus sucks its thumb and recoils from pain. Two occasions I've heard people use statements to describe the nature of fetus. One person described a fetus as an undifferentiated mass of protoplasm. And I think that's an intemperate statement. But not only is it intemperate, it is simply biologically incorrect. It is not an undifferentiated mass of protoplasm. It is a mass that is already genetically differentiated, and one that has a heartbeat and brain waves and so on. Heard another person describe an unborn baby that was aborted as simply so much domestic sewage. Now again, that is an intemperate, emotive statement that adds little to any sober discussion of when life begins. But if we're going to call an aborted fetus sewage, then this demeans the process that involves a beating heart. I've never seen sewage with a beating heart or with brain waves. This reflects to me not just a question of a low view of the fetus, but a low view of life altogether. That's why I labored in the second discussion the significance of understanding the sanctity of life in general. It's an amazing thing that this embryo has the genetic code intact, that in a few days has a heartbeat, brain waves, all of those things that are critical to discerning the presence of human life. I once read a book entitled Window on the Womb. Some of you perhaps have seen that book. And the thing that attracted my attention to that is the same type of thing that grabbed my attention in seeing the movie entitled The Silent Scream, with those who are opposed to the pro-life movement feels just a piece of propaganda. If you remember The Silent Scream, it was really a video camera record of an actual abortion, where one could see very clearly in the film the reaction of the fetus to the invasion of its body of a knife and clamps that crushed its skull and cut its limbs. And you could see this fetus's face literally contorting